Hello, and welcome to Electrifying Growth, a podcast brought to you by Edison Partners. I'm Chris Sugden, the managing partner here at Edison and your host. There are moments in a person or company's journey that are undeniably electric. The spark or sparks, if you will, that propel you or your company to new heights. With Electrifying Growth, we're here to have in-depth, real conversations with great leaders who have been there and done it before. Edison has been investing in high-growth technology companies for more than 35 years, and I have been here at Edison doing this investing piece for more than 20 years. We've led over 225 investments. We understand that it takes great leaders and visionaries to build market leaders. We are your support system, a CEO and management's entourage, if you will. Let's introduce this episode's guest. Welcome to another edition of Electrifying Growth. I'm your host, Chris Sugden. And today's guest, I'm truly honored to have on a serial entrepreneur, a founder, a builder, and a leader. Barry Conlon joins me as we discuss the journey of building not just one, but two companies, navigating the GFC, for those who forget that, the great financial crisis, as well as, of course, COVID and the pandemic we've all just lived through. Barry is the CEO and founder of Overhaul. He's a rich background in supply chain security and visibility. Before founding Overhaul in 2016, he served as the CEO of FreightWatch International, where he played a pivotal role in transforming the company into a global leader in supply chain security solutions. His extensive experience spans over 3 decades, during which he has consistently demonstrated a strategic and growth-oriented leadership style. And as you'll hear from him, empathy being core to all that. Barry's educational background includes studies at CBS Lucan in Dublin. Under his leadership, Overhaul has grown significantly, integrating extensive technology to enhance the supply chain security industry. Overhaul is the only data-agnostic supply chain visibility and security solution in the market. It's also the easiest to use. That's a powerful combination that transforms the supply chain into a competitive advantage. In today's conversation, Barry will explore his journey from military service, which is really phenomenal, to a move to the US, where he began FreightWatch and scaled to Overhaul. Again, looking forward to discussing with Barry the revolutionizing of the supply chain industry and his growth as a leader. Barry Conlon, welcome to Electrifying Growth. Thanks for joining me today.
Pleasure, Chris. Great to be here.
As I introduced, or you heard in our introduction, for the audience out there, Barry's one of those, what we call serial entrepreneurs, special breeds that either have the guts or the insanity to, start companies twice, because we know how hard it is the first time. So we're going to get into that here today, Barry. But before we do, let's kind of go to your personal story. I know you served, that's a big theme for me, kind of what makes the entrepreneur, the founder. Talk about kind of before business, if you would, your personal story.
Yeah, my first career, Chris, was what I see as my happy place, even today. And I joke about that because I can honestly tell you, in the 12 years I served in the military, as in most military environments, you're miserable for most of that, because that's part of the job. You go where other people don't want to go or are running away from. I got selected early into a tier 1 special operations unit based in Ireland called the Army Ranger Wing, which is back in the late 80s when I was selected. We were engaged very actively in the terrorism, counterinsurgency going on in the island of Ireland that most people are vaguely aware of who's doing what. So, and that was well before 9/11, where terrorism came into everyone's kind of, front thing of, this is what's going on. But we were, I suppose, door kicking at least half a decade before that. I was actively engaged in doing that kind of stuff. But it was a great environment for a young man. I always say I never went to a formal 3rd level business school. That my education was 11 years in that kind of outfit.
Your humility, which most military people have, that they don't want to necessarily talk about. These things, if you told me, you'd have to kill me kind of thing, or double clicking even on what learnings you took from you're doing what other people either can't or won't do, but also dealing with as a young person.
The reason why I don't talk about it too much and why I look back at it so fondly, is I feel embarrassed almost to be referencing it, because I had so much fun. I really, really embraced and loved what I was doing. And it was a very challenging environment, small team cultures in this kind of environment. You're very self-reliant, and your whole world is your buddies around you, and that small team of maybe 5 or 6, depending on which uni you're in. It's where I learned leadership. Anybody can go to school and learn management, right? That's a kind of a road that you're given. You can even kind of have bullet points that guide you on the way when you don't know what to do. So you can mimic, an ability. And a lot of people, more power to them, succeed very well doing that. But it's a whole different world when you're talking about leadership, like bringing people with you, particularly when the going gets tough. And when you're in that kind of tier 1 environment, you're almost always in a place where you have got to figure it out, because if you don't, bad things will happen.
It's literally life and death.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, you don't like to talk about that, but I served in Africa with UN missions in Somalia. You know, I was in Mogadishu for 5 months during Black Hawk Down, in situations like that, where really things are changing and quite dramatically. And you have to be flexible. You have to be ready to expect the unexpected. Was one of our unofficial models in my unit. That kind of ethos that's taught you, alongside of a very strong culture of support. And in many respects, this is going to sound strange for a military culture, but empathy of knowing what your buddy's going through, because you've all gone through the same. You've all reached the same standard to actually get even an opportunity to step in the door. And stepping in the door is attrition rates of 90% are regularly taken out of a selection process. So really, you're in this kind of high performing environment, and you know it. It's in every part of your DNA, and people that succeed in that embrace it, and it becomes part of what's kind of boring to them in many respects as they get better in their profession of being an operator.
Well, this wasn't in my script, but you just sort of touched on empathy and military. Kind of weren't words you necessarily often linked, but we were at West Point together. And one of the things I took from the Thayer Leader Development Academy, if you will, up at West Point, we've had our CEO summit there a couple of times, more for the audience to hear. But I know you loved that, but I think what we heard as those who hadn't been in that culture, how much caring goes into developing great leaders.
It's probably one of the strongest character traits you have to develop. And unfortunately, and this sounds terrible, like anybody who hasn't the ability to kind of, engage with their comrades and partners, support organizations, all of that, you're just going to be less successful. And, it is kind of essential to building a good team. We all know that lots of great ideas in the business world, Chris, have failed. And in most cases, it's down to leadership. Everybody works hard to try and make it do, especially those that know that's a cliff if I don't make it happen. So everybody's committed. But those that succeed and fail, I'd say a lot of it's to do with the actual individual personality of the leader to bring people through tough situations. And most importantly, this is where I think the spec ops community served me very well, is the ability to pivot if things are not going well. Like that in itself is, you enter a room, which is a very dynamic, loud, scary, noisy, but totally confusing environment. And you've got to shoot quickly. You got to make sure you don't hit what people used to call hotels hostages. You want to hit a tango or terrorist. And you don't know what's actually in the room when you go in there, but you've got to make split decisions that are literally life and death. And then, if it doesn't work and there's something there that's actually making you say, well, we're not going to get through that door, or we're not going to do this, you have to pivot quickly and figure a way. And in special ops communities, we've all seen good and bad movies of this, but you notice that they just kind of roll with it. That's the environment that I learned for 11 years of top tier action and engagement. And it set me up perfectly for a career as an entrepreneur.
Getting inside that mind of what built the entrepreneur and who you are, so much of, to your point, that first 10, 11 years, and then your life changes quickly into, is it directly to FreightWatch, or was there some small interlude in between?
I was actually faced with one of these career decisions that I'd been told that based on some kind of actions I'd taken overseas, that I got a recommendation to be commissioned. I was a ranker, I was an NCO. So I was going to be commissioned as an officer, which unfortunately meant that I could never probably go back to my original unit, which, once you're selected out of that, you can't go back. It's just one of the rules the Army maintains. I think it's a stupid rule, but it's a rule.
It's a fork in the road.
Yeah. So while it was a promotion and a good career track, it kind of, for me, it wasn't where I wanted to go. So, I was poached out by a risk management agency that put me in touch with a lot of US multinational companies in Ireland. We were just going through a peace dividend that was coming out because of the Northern Ireland Agreement. So the war was coming to an end. And there was lots of out of work terrorists that were looking for gainful employment and criminality. And, so I was talking to these CEOs about what to do when you go to Mexico and not get kidnapped. We're saying, look, it's not me, it's my cargo is getting hit. And we're losing a lot of product here.
Yeah, not people, my stuff.
Yeah. So can you look at that? And we did. It led to some of my colleagues in special operations formed a company, and, I was part of that. And we quickly kind of got a US interest. There was a very large company that was operating in Ireland at the time. And the reason why I'm in Austin, Texas, you can put two and two together. Well, I always said that if that founder had been in Nome, Alaska, that's where I'd be living right now, But they asked me to come over, and we came up with a very good concept of kind of risk management that was based on, don't be crowded out by the noise, the 80-20 thing. Look for the 20% where that really matters and solve for that. It probably will solve for everything else. And that was actually very successful when we tried it with a few US multinationals, and they said, look, we just don't have this problem here. We have it everywhere. So I was invited to come over to Austin, Texas and build a business plan and submit it to their corporation, and they accepted it. That, led to kind of bootstrapping a company for 10, 12 years, which was very fundamental to me, Chris, because we bootstrapped it on cash flow. There's no better way to learn how to run a business than when you're trying to bootstrap a global company on cash flow. Didn't know anything about venture, that raising money would have made it a little bit easier and you could have scaled faster. Didn't know any of that. But when we started to make some waves, the calls start coming from guys like you, Chris, that was kind of, oh, this is really interesting. Somebody's going to kind of invest in your business to help you scale, and what's not to like here. And that's really the second phase of my education about how all that works.
Right. It was one thing to start it. It's nothing to scale it.
Yeah. But as we were starting to really get our strides, the knock on the door came from Fortune 50 who said, hey, we're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. And, I already had professional money. I'd raised 10 million at this stage, 10 years into the growth of the business. It was a really good deal, and we decided to accept it. Now, I didn't realize at the time that, be careful what you wish for as an entrepreneur, because it's not always that great little comment of, we'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Is not a good thing, right? But it can be challenging because, sometimes companies buy other companies because they feel threatened by them.
Do you buy them to kill them? Do you buy them to mothball them? What exactly the motive?
Didn't know that, Chris. I'm being a military guy. I think one of the most important mantras, particularly special operations, is embrace change or get used to irrelevance, right? That's a much used term, but really what it means is that if you don't break your own model, or at least be disruptive to what you're doing, or have that kind of red cell mentality of challenging and stress testing what it is you're doing, somebody else will do it.
Embrace change or become irrelevant.
That's right. Or embrace irrelevance, because there's no other option. That is a fundamental cornerstone of military thinking, by the way. And a lot of the things that we take for granted today, logistics was basically an invention. All the way back to Napoleon, an army doesn't march, his legs, and marches on his stomach, right? Logistics, right? He said that over 200 years ago. So the military, as it relates to kind of that kind of creative thinking and thinking outside the box, it is the quintessential, service that thinks that way because it has to.
So it's interesting because supply chain, logistics, and military, there's a hand in hand. Your industry is no accident. So that you've specialized in your career. You said one thing that I want to double click on because I wanted to see if there's another thing you might pull out, the FreightWatch journey. Be careful what you wish for. I heard that loud and clear. I think everyone can take that for what it is. Understand that buyers have multiple motives, not always a growth motive, not always a strategic motive, or a strategic for them, not for you, so to speak. What's another one as we move forward to Overhaul or the current company you're building? What else did you take from FreightWatch? I'm sure there's a million of them, but kind of the top two or three. We've got one, which isn't sort of be negative. It's more, hey, I learned this. What else did you take as you walked into your second company from that FreightWatch journey that sticks out?
The other one I think is most relevant is, Cortez and burning the ships, when you get to the beach. If you have an out, Chris, you'll take it. That's a simple fact. It's human nature, particularly when you're going through the really, really rough times. I remember having to go in and tell my wife we're selling our house. By the way, it was a dream house that we had bought on the success of the last sale, so it was a house that we kind of designed. We loved it. But it was I had to make cash flow and I could see we were heading towards a cliff and I need a month, 2 months out. We needed to have cash so I could keep going because I believed in it fully. Thank God I had a woman who, her first question back to me was, are you insane? It wasn't that. It was okay, how long have we got? But I always say this to young entrepreneurs when they're starting is, guys, don't feather a nest when you're in there. You're the one who's got the most austerity of all the team because you're the one who's taking on the chin. You will probably gain the most if it turns out a successful enterprise, but you have to be the one that's really in the trench. It's just human nature. You'll take it. You'll fall towards safety. But if there's no safety, that's where you want to be. And the last one that goes hand in hand with that one, Chris, the hardest one, is you're not afraid to fail.
They go hand in hand, don't they? You're not going to burn the ships you're afraid to fail.
Exactly right. They're literally lockstep, hand in hand with each other because you might be born naturally with that kind of risk component built in. We test all of our executives with the personality testing and that kind of thing. And funny thing is when my chief people officer gave me my results, I scored highest in hope. I laughed and they were all laughing too. So, because they were saying to me, two of my C's that are with me from the start were saying, we were walking around for a week or two thinking we're doomed. And then you'd walk in, I was like, It's a beautiful, bright, sunny day. Let's fix this. Let's look at it again. It's this kind of thing. I didn't consciously take out a manual and go to page 15 to say, okay, act like you really believe. It has to come natural. You have to believe in it. Because if you don't believe it, and for one moment in your eyes, that hope fades as the leader, it dies in everybody else. We're all looking for an escape, right? That's the thing. And you have to believe it, Chris. You have to believe your own.
So let me turn these around, because really the last one is almost it's more just a thought. The other two are a must. Burn the ships, embrace risk, understand it's part of the deal.
Chris, can I give you one more?
Of course.
This is one that I particularly embrace, because I know I'm particularly guilty of this one, but you've got to embrace your weaknesses. As a leader, know what you're good at. And then for those around you, you're obviously going to hire to fill that gap, right? But don't be afraid of that. Too many CEOs think I'm the be all and end all. I want to take all the credit. This is, it's an ego trip, right? And it's the worst thing you can do as a leader. Your team, you build them to fill the gaps and to build strength, right? To be a force multiplier, get great financial expertise. And I was lucky, my partner in all of this, Dave Brow, is a guru, as I see it, as when it comes to all that kind of thing. So a great kind of yin and yang tag team thing. You can really focus on what you're doing. Just like in a team going in a room, there's lots of blind spots behind you. You can't look at it. You can't do your job. You probably get killed. But the guy on your right and the guy on your left, they're taking care of them. And you've got to trust them, right? And that's the same with the team. And what I do to actually build the team and build confidence in the team is I kind of tend to make a bit of a joke about when I'm openly vocal about, if you want me to read that spreadsheet, we're making a mistake here. Let them see your vulnerability. Really recognize what it is you're not good at, because that builds confidence, and they'll know, hey, I'm a key member of this. I'm a part of, a greater good, which is the team. Your ego has no place. And too many great companies fail because their CEO, wants to pick the color of the cushions in the lobby, right? I hate to say it, but, narcissistic kind of personalities that naturally you probably need some of that to be successful.
To even start, you have to have a little bit of that.
But dampen the sharper points of all that, and that's growing as a human, right? That's growing as a person, and always be open. I always say, like, listen, you've got two ears and one mouth, right? So, you're being told something there. So listen, but at the same time, when it's time for action and decision, you also have to be forceful in saying, okay, guys, this is what we're doing.
Tough segue, but we'll make it. Let's go deeper into supply chain, but not so deep that we geek out, because you're really focused on supply chain, for lack of a better word, security and visibility. But what's funny is the whole world, literally during the pandemic, I think it was the famous toilet paper. Like, why can't I get toilet paper? Yeah. So give the 60-second, more or less, the short elevator ride, as I would call it, on what Overhaul does, how you do it, why it's important. Because then we get more into how you're different and that sort of thing.
The fact that everybody can only turn on the television every day and you see supply chains getting more vulnerable and riskier. The existential threats like war in the Middle East, a ship getting stuck in the canal, bridge goes down Baltimore, the CrowdStrike hit just as the worst time possible because everybody's planning for the big surge at the end of the year. Supply chains are vulnerable. They used to be a dusty area of people's kind of P&L. Boring was a word I heard a lot of, but now they're strategic. Companies compete on it. We only have to hear the doorbell ring on our porch to realize that, that this is a very competitive environment. Overhaul provides resiliency and, I suppose, a much used term, visibility on your supply chain. Most importantly, around what's going wrong. We don't see visibility as a solution. It's a data stream, right? It's one of many data streams we use to kind of help a customer understand, here is the current state of your supply chain as it relates to compliance, what you want to see happening. But most importantly, when it's not happening, we know it, and we know it early, and we can lean in and actually fix it. So we're not about just reporting on a dashboard. We're about kind of acting on behalf of these actionable insights. So at 2:00 on a Sunday morning, let me assure everybody in the business world, no one is looking at a dashboard at 2:00 unless you have a real problem. If you're doing that at 2:00 on a Sunday morning, but we are in our control towers around the world. And, a very important customer of ours says, hey, this shouldn't be happening. And if you see something like this happening, here's what you want to do. On a kind of industrial scale, we kind of fix these issues that actually put people back in compliance. It leads to a faster velocity in supply chain. And the faster it moves, the less riskier it becomes. And it arrives intact and on time. And our job, and, my buyer, my chief supply chain guy, or my procurement guy, security guy, will always say, I sleep better knowing Overhaul's on the inside. You're a partner, not a vendor. You're out there fixing stuff on my behalf. that just is to me a force multiplier, to use that military term again, of resiliency in an ever weakening global supply chain.
Enterprises are tough to sell to. Global enterprises are even tougher to sell to. In a world where supply chain is such a hot topic, and frankly, there's been plenty of venture and private equity money, for lack of a better word, thrown at companies. What would you say the couple of key differentiators are for the overall story these days? Some of this you're like, well, Chris, you know it. Well, the audience doesn't.
Yeah. No, you guys have been great. Like, led our Series A, involved in our B, B2. It's been a wonderful experience with Edison. And Ryan, as you mentioned, is one of my directors, and I would actually say a good friend. What I would say about your industry, Chris, as it relates to looking at certain sectors they want to invest in and which one do they pick versus which one they don't. What surprised me, again, not being from your world, was the amount of work you guys do before you actually decide to make that investment. It is a long, very agonizing for a good purpose process where, you know, you're doing things like talking to a customer. You know, in some cases I've seen actual ex-employees being reached out to you. Like, you know, we all talk about diligence and background and all that kind of thing, and everybody kind of takes that for granted. But I've seen some quite really in-depth kind of efforts being taken that cost money, by the way. It's like a commitment. When you become a partner with a company and they think highly of what you're doing, they will talk about it. They're happy to talk about it. They will shine a light on one versus the other because, you know, I want to see more of that, not less of that. And, you know, you guys, your industry, you know, I think takes that to an extreme level to make sure that you're making the right decision on your LP's behalf before you actually make these commitments, because they are heavy commitments, and we all know the stats. A lot don't work versus the ones that do, and everyone's trying to pick the winners. But, you know, for me, you always have to think of that. It shouldn't be a conscious thought. It should be an unconscious thought that look after your customers and they will look after you.
That's one of your biggest differentiators then, is our customers know we care. I guess I'll say it that way.
Yeah. And like, especially in the world of, like you said, enterprise global brands that are killers, you know, they wouldn't be there at that level unless they were very efficient at what they do, and they will squeeze you. They'll do everything you expect them to do. You know, I always said that hunting whales is a difficult one, but the good news is they move in packs, right? They swim in packs, and well regarded and received. You know, you're doing a good job. You're getting credit from your customer. That will get around, and when people come looking for it, it's there. It's quite easy to find, and that's really important, because not only does the venture world do that, but, you know, these giant corporations do it as well. You know, in my space, they don't compete, Chris, because when you're looking at integrity and risk and somebody coming in and disrupting your supply chain by theft or damage or all these other nefarious kind of activities that go on, particularly in the world today, we live in today, where everything is online. So there's a greater return for a criminal in this world than there ever was before, because we're prepared to buy stuff online and accept
It's easier, right?
Yes, supply and demand. That's what it is, right? So in that world, it has to work what you do. And you talking about it is never going to cut the mustard, because they'll always think, well, you're always going to say that, right?
Yeah, you're selling your own cooking.
Yeah. An enterprise customer of an internationally recognizable brand telling somebody else that, yeah, we'll only use these guys because, you know, it works.
Now, you said something very early about FreightWatch about bootstrapping. That kind of goes along with the burn the ships, right? If you have no choice, I'm all in. How do you think your own mentality, for lack of a better way to put it, as a CEO changes as you know capital is not only there on the balance sheet, but also maybe even part of the equation? You need it, so to speak, whether it's acquisition and or scaling. How has your mind over time changed from that? There is a change that happens, right? And you don't want to go from capital efficient to capital inefficient either. How do you reconcile that?
Your thinking has to change. You can think small, you can think big, but it's probably somewhere in between. I suppose one of the great things about bringing professional money onto your board, they've been there before, you know, and as the CEO, if you don't have a board that is effectively, you know, your boss, your confidant, your, you know, enabler, you know, that you can go and actually be vulnerable, and nobody knows it all. And you have to test your assumptions. You don't want to run too fast, but you have to run fast enough. But the more people you have around you that have seen it before that can guide you. And that's why, you know, I think board construction is probably one of the most important factor in success. If you've got all the other right fundamentals, like you've got a business idea with a good product market fit, It has global expansion in its nature and because it's going to be wanted. You know, all of those fundamentals are there. Then it's down to execution and the individuals that are executing it, right? And that's where the weakness comes because, you know, you as the guy who's got to make the calls, you can't do that on your own. You can't be in an echo chamber. You need strong advisors. You need mentors who've been there, have done that, have seen it, and, you know, have maybe a different impression and a view on the world, which is always useful.
Did you always have that view of that's what a board will do for me or could do for me? Over time, have you seen the value of a board build, so to speak?
No, I got it wrong, Chris. I really got it badly wrong where I didn't have that. And that's one of the learning points I took from my first experience is kind of realizing just how important is that, you know, a chairman. Like I would recommend against the CEO being the chairman. You see that in some companies and you really want a separate guy, but you definitely want an operator. You're looking for that kind of country opinion. When you ask that question, you know, what do you think? Don't be expecting and like wanting and getting upset if you don't hear what you want.
What you were thinking, right?
What good is that? You know, and again, that comes down to kind of personality and being strong enough to appear vulnerable sometimes and say, look, I just don't know what to do here.
So is this, Barry, is it maturity? Back to the, if I knew then what I know now kind of thing. Is it that simple? What would you say to a young entrepreneur who candidly is fighting with me saying, we really need a chairman? Well, no, I'm the chairman. I'm the founder. What would you tell that person?
It is a maturity thing, but it's also a self-reflection. You know that you need country opinions and you should challenge your thinking. And what that translates to is like a team of rivals about Abraham Lincoln. And you really need that kind of thinking. Now, let's be careful that doesn't become disruptive. You can bring experience. And that's the key if you're a young entrepreneur. You should be open and willing and brave enough to bring experience onto your board.
Someone else has been there and done it, seen it.
A board is not just an accoutrement. You've got to really, really partner with them to figure out, can we get the best people in here? And then if it's not working, change it.
That's another, I'll say, an Edison practice we like to sort of talk about in portfolio companies. If you don't create an evaluation and or a term for boards, they just become this thing that just kind of goes on and on forever. There needs to be some way to have an open dialogue about this is working or it's not for both sides. No one who's at a board level wants to admit it's not working because everyone wants to be successful because we're all successful people. So different times for different people.
Exactly right. It's just like it is for your management team. Another, probably the hardest thing as a leader, when you have to ask people to lead, a board selection to me, Chris, is absolutely vital. It's critical.
It's interesting to hear how much I'd say your own perspective changed over, call it 2 companies.
Oh yeah. You got to learn every day, you know, and like you don't know it all. And if you're in an environment where you're willing to let people know that you want to learn, it changes the dynamic around you, you know, like people are more approachable. Like they come to you and ask if that's what you want to hear. Because I found sometimes when I've kind of got it wrong and I've had to go back and lean in and I'm talking to people that I wouldn't normally get to talk to, especially in this hybrid environment, it's really challenging. The amount of information and knowledge I learned that can help me be successful. You can micromanage, but it just shows me that kind of attitude of being open, approachable, you know when to shut that down when it's inappropriate, right? And people are wasting your time. That should not be the reason why you don't do it in the first place. Be out there. Yes, it's going to be a challenge to your timetable management when people want to talk to you, but that's your job.
Be willing to hear things you don't necessarily want to hear.
And that can change everything, right? So I'm just saying it's about being engaged as a leader and your team know you're there. They trust you. They have confidence in you. They'll only have that. It's not based on results. It's based on interaction with you and how you deal with the challenging circumstances, not the good times. And always, always give them credit and always, always take the blame.
Well said. Let's shift gears to Crises. You founded a company where the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis, was kind of part of the narrative or the arc. But obviously for everyone's, you know, recent history, we just lived through a horrible pandemic and COVID and all that. What's interesting about your business, supply chain, was kind of, like I said, became part of everyone's lexicon. And now we are more aware of it than we ever were. But I call it a boon and a bust, or boon and a blessing and a curse, COVID, for your business. What do you say to an entrepreneur relative to crisis, what it does, what it should do to you as a leader in a company, et cetera? Because you've lived through it. And,
you know, these black swan events, none of us see them coming. But when they do come, you have to be ready. This is like almost like a pivot. Your fundamentals will change rapidly. Growth is being squeezed, constricted. You're looking at your cost. Always, especially during the boom times, always have an eye to EBITDA and, how you're actually performing, because the world will change. That's the one thing we're guaranteed, is that it's boom and bust, as you said. And maybe it's not as dramatic as that now. It's kind of an ebb and flow, a trough, but, always plan. The survival of your company should be in your hands, not existentially to what the market's going to take to do. So, things like running a good business that's capital efficient and, is driving towards profitability. At the same time, not kind of restricting yourself because you want to grow and take advantage of good times, but know that bad times are coming and be ready for that when they do come. And that's the lesson here, is like, you have to think conservatively around spend always.
I suppose it goes back to your military training, because right around the next corner could be something really bad.
Yeah, you just don't know, but you have to be ready for it. And being ready for it in a business means that I can survive it. That's a hard one for people to think, especially in the good times, because it gets so alluring and so like,
it's so hard to picture the bad times when things are going up and to the right.
I would say one of the things that, and I personally lived through this in this experience with Overhaul, is don't get distracted by that kind of glam, where somebody has raised buckets of money and is spending it all on marketing. It's, look, focus on your customers.
We've seen some real big so-called unicorns in your space not be around any longer because they were focused on the wrong things, I guess you'd say, right?
Yeah, and they had good products. There was value in what they were doing, but they just did it the wrong way. It was kind of like the cart before the horse kind of thing. It was like, oh, this is all about an exit. Think about your products. How can I make that better? That's the focus that a CEO needs to. Don't get distracted by the noise. This is the way you go back to your advisors and you constantly check. And then the situation like we're in today, where there is a lot of pain out there, is the Chinese symbol for crisis is also the opportunity, right? So, maybe that opens up an M&A door, and that's kind of what we're looking at right now, is kind of looking around us to see what would be a great product, would be a good addition to our platform that can service the same customers are servicing today. Yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit, we'll call it our 30 plus years of business experience to the test. You have to hire and develop young people all the time. What advice do you give to those hiring young people of today? What do you see as the CEO of a business that has to kind of continue to hire both young and, middle level, then more mature senior leaders?
I hear a lot of talk about that. Some people are saying, and I agree with some of it, that, the world today, the young employees, the Gen Zs, whatever, are different. But look, it's the same fundamentals.
I was going to say, are they different? Right.
Well, to me, what should come first, that they're walking into your company deciding, do I stay here? Do I dedicate my precious years of my life to this entity? They're not necessarily thinking about, do I get a return on that? But they're just thinking about, am I going to enjoy this environment? So culture first. I don't know if that's ever been off the table, but it always should be first. In my view, is they have to sense and feel, is this a team of individuals I would really enjoy hanging out with? And you've got to work really hard at that, especially in this hybrid environment of it. Like, it can't be just kind of marketing material. Like, here's my mission statement and you see it on the door. It has to be, they're going to talk to people that are in the company. They're going to look at Glassdoor. They're going to do all of that. And I don't rate the Glassdoor ones as a true benchmark, because I think a lot of that kind of is coming from a negative place. But at the same time, they will look at it. Embrace the fact that you want to project who you are. And that's not just to your new employees. That also projects to your customers and the marketplace, and to the venture community, the capital community. The sponsor needs to know that these guys know what they're doing, and they have a good, strong management team that can take it to the next stage. That's always been there. It's just kind of, I suppose, it's packaged in different ways based on the environment we're living in today. And it's important to the new entrants to the workforce that, they want to feel engaged. And it's hard to do it in a hybrid space.
Well, I've heard you say hybrid a few times, and I think, look, Amazon's certainly a supply chain king, and they're saying we got to be back. What's a lesson learned or a tidbit for somebody else running a hybrid company that you would say, do this, don't do that, so to speak?
Big one for me is, don't let talent pass the door. I don't care where they are. Like, we're in 18 countries, 26 states. That's what hybrid really means. Like, you've got a dispersed workforce. You've got to reinvent how you engage. Take advantage of these great tools that are out there to actually connect your company. But not letting talent pass the door is a critical one. If they want to work from home, that's fine. I look at people's output, not where they sit. And that's what I instill in my managers to look at it that way. Is that person doing a good job?
Would you say though it is harder?
Oh, it's much harder. And the one thing I mourn is it's terrible for the young people today that they're missing out on that kind of office.
I wasn't fishing, but I'm glad you said it.
Yeah, it's such an important part of
Their career and life development,
yes.
both are impacted.
Yeah, and I see some of them asking for it now, which is good because I embrace that too. So we're seeing a little bit of a shift. You know, I don't like these mandates some companies are making, or you have to be here this time. And that's the wrong way I see about doing it. Is a day a week is, let's start there. And then everybody talks about, wasn't that a great day? You know, you suddenly find out somebody's organizing a happy hour on the back of it, you know. And that's what you're looking for, is that kind of connectivity, that connection. Encourage people to come in. And, you know, I tell my team that, you know, when you're having these important meetings, it might be a QBR or something like that. It's kind of like, it's not like every week, but it's like, it's there and it's 4 times a year. Put a bit of effort into it. Bring them in.
Make it matter, make it count.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I think you're leading some really great thoughts. And I'd like to ask all the guests this. So 25-year-old Barry, the old, if I knew then what I know now, you can do one, you can do 2 things, but it's not the, would I do something different? Because some people interpret that question as regrets. This isn't regrets. It's just 30 years of learning plus, right? What would you tell yourself then? Go do this, not that.
I probably would have been a little softer in my earlier stages.
It's funny. Sometimes that's a reverse, right? Sometimes you get more crusty, if you will, or difficult as you get older. You're saying you've toned it down.
My ability to bring people along maybe earlier, I wasn't quite as whole as I strived to be, and I still strive to be today. And probably a little bit too quick sometimes back then, you know. So I suppose it's a personality trait really of kind of like can do, will do, charge the hill kind of thing. I could have taken a softer approach there. Maybe there wouldn't have been so many casualties. I don't know. But I think back on that a lot and saying like I could have been a better person than I am now. And that probably would have led to maybe even a better outcome.
That is a lot of vulnerability. Thank you. I think our audience will appreciate that. That's what it takes to grow, is to be able to reflect like that. And so I told you I was calling this episode before we sort of pre-call, if you will, or pre-recording. Is it easier the second time around?
In the Irish military, when we used to do, you know, when you're doing your basic parachute course, right? You have to do 5 jumps to get your wings. And it was a real big deal, right? I mean, they were important, right? Getting your wings. And it was a terrifying experience jumping out of a perfectly good airplane and hoping that this thing you pack is going to work. So much kind of distraction, noise, and kind of, it was really like a violent environment. But the worst jump actually is your second jump. You know all of that, right? And you're saying to yourself, your body was telling you during that first experience, don't do this again.
It's a bad idea.
There probably has to be a little bit of insanity because lots of people do the second jump and like I ended up with 500 of them. So that shows you how insane I was, right? But that's how I like in the second. Like you know more, and that's a good and a bad thing. There's probably a greater fear, but also hopefully if you're smart enough, you've brought the experience along that's going to make it a little bit of an easier ride. So I suppose it's probably a little bit harder because you know the stats are against you even tenfold from your first one. You might have got lucky on that one. Like no entrepreneur believes they got lucky. They think it was all them, right? But doing it twice,
you have to have a little bit of luck, good fortune, meeting the opportunity, being ready to create your own luck. I'll close with what I had written down as my guess was. The answer being, it depends. And it's the biggest kind of squishy answer you can give. But your point, knowledge is power, but that same power could also be debilitating. To your point about burning the ships and taking risk and embracing it at the beginning, without those kind of traits in your DNA, you would have never started the company the second time, right? So it's kind of in you.
Chris, you have to enjoy it. You have to be motivated. Motivation is not money. It becomes less important, you know, and that's probably a good thing and probably a mark of success. But at the same time, you cannot put yourself and your family through this kind of whirlwinds and this
drama and difficulty and right.
Yeah, it's got to keep you motivated. If it doesn't, like, why are you doing it? That would be the definition of insanity for me. Like, doing the same thing, expecting the same outcome, and you hate it. So you got to love it.
Your experience, your thoughtfulness, your empathy, understanding kind of what it takes. It's truly been an honor, a joy, one, to be your partner through Ryan, my partner. Thank you for letting us, be a part of the overall journey. But as importantly, even today, thank you for joining me on Electrifying Growth. I know our audience is going to get a lot out of this. Your experience about building not one, but 2 companies, super insightful. Challenges, it just seems like what I take from this conversation is you've embraced them, you've leaned into them. The analogy of, well, if we burn the ships, this is a really bad analogy, but you don't sail around the storm, you sail into the storm.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way you've taken on your life, it seems. So thank you very much, as always, and to bigger and better, because I know Overhaul will continue to scale and do great things. So Barry Conlon, CEO and founder of Overhaul, thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. A special thanks to this week's guest for sharing their time and insight. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners Network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again. Welcome to another edition of Electrifying Growth. I'm your host, Chris Sugden. And today's guest, I'm truly honored to have on a serial entrepreneur, a founder, a builder, and a leader. Barry Conlon joins me as we discuss the journey of building not just one, but two companies, navigating the GFC, for those who forget that, the great financial crisis, as well as, of course, COVID and the pandemic we've all just lived through. Barry is the CEO and founder of Overhaul. He's a rich background in supply chain security and visibility. Before founding Overhaul in 2016, he served as the CEO of FreightWatch International, where he played a pivotal role in transforming the company into a global leader in supply chain security solutions. His extensive experience spans over 3 decades, during which he has consistently demonstrated a strategic and growth-oriented leadership style. And as you'll hear from him, empathy being core to all that. Barry's educational background includes studies at CBS Lucan in Dublin. You'll hear he talks a little funny. I'm kidding, of course, being an Irelander. A Dubliner, I guess I should say. Under his leadership, Overhaul has grown significantly, integrating extensive technology to enhance the supply chain security industry. Overhaul is the only data-agnostic supply chain visibility and security solution in the market. It's also the easiest to use. That's a powerful combination that transforms the supply chain into a competitive advantage. In today's conversation, Barry will explore his journey from military service, which is really phenomenal, to a move to the US, where he began FreightWatch and scaled to Overhaul. Again, looking forward to discussing with Barry the revolutionizing of the supply chain industry and his growth as a leader. Welcome to another edition of Electrifying Growth. I'm your host, Chris Sugden. And today's guest, I'm truly honored to have on a serial entrepreneur, a founder, a builder, and a leader. Barry Conlon joins me as we discuss the journey of building not just one, but two companies, navigating the GFC, for those who forget that, the great financial crisis, as well as, of course, COVID and the pandemic we've all just lived through. Barry is the CEO and founder of Overhaul. He's a rich background in supply chain security and visibility. Before founding Overhaul in 2016, he served as the CEO of FreightWatch International, where he played a pivotal role in transforming the company into a global leader in supply chain security solutions. His extensive experience spans over 3 decades, during which he has consistently demonstrated a strategic and growth-oriented leadership style. And as you'll hear from him, empathy being core to all that. Barry's educational background includes studies at CBS Lucan in Dublin. You'll hear he talks a little funny. I'm kidding, of course, being an Irelander, a Dubliner, I guess I should say. Under his leadership, Overhaul has grown significantly, integrating extensive technology to enhance the supply chain security industry. Overhaul is the only data-agnostic supply chain visibility and security solution in the market. It's also the easiest to use. That's a powerful combination that transforms the supply chain into a competitive advantage. In today's conversation, Barry will explore his journey from military service, which is really phenomenal, to a move to the US, where he began FreightWatch and scaled to Overhaul. Again, looking forward to discussing with Barry the revolutionizing of the supply chain industry and his growth as a leader.